Alright, so here's a Diablo 4 video for the Sub-Zero Sorcerer build. So, how this is going to work, I'm going to go for the skill tree. I'm going to show you all the skills, why it synergizes. I'm then going to go through my gear, right? And how all of the legendary effects affect the build, and what stats that you really want for it. And then I'm going to show you some gameplay right after it. So the first thing that we're going to want is a Frostbolt. The reason why we want this is because it reinforces the shield and frozen effects that we're already going to get, making it more common. And the first enhancement is really going to help out, and that'll be shown in a second. And then the second one for generating more mana. So after your base attack, you want to come down here to your core skills and get your ice shards. These deal increased damage to frozen enemies. That's going to come into play in a second. And then shards will always ricochet off of frozen enemies. That's also huge. That'll come into play in a second. And then hitting an enemy with 5 ice shards and a single cast make them vulnerable for 2 seconds. Vulnerable enemies take 20% more damage. It's just more damage, really. And it also synergizes with a different thing. So the main attack, the main thing that this build is based around is this attack. Frost Nova, right? May think wondering, why is it a defensive skill? Why are you basing an entire build around a defensive skill? Well, I'm going to go into that. So, how this works is that it's a cooldown skill, doesn't cost mana, but it freezes enemies around you for 2 seconds, right? And then upgrading it can lower the duration, which you're going to want to do, and I'll explain that to you in a second. Killing enemies that are frozen by Frost Nova reduces its cooldown by 2 seconds, up to 6 seconds per cast. So, if you kill 3 enemies, then it reduces the cooldown by more than half if you have it upgraded. And then Mystical Frost Nova, enemies become vulnerable for 4 seconds, and bosses 8. You may think, well, why do we need more vulnerability? Because we already had that on the ice shards. So the reason why we want that is because of this thing, the ice barrier. So, or the ice armor. So it's a barrier, so it just absorbs some of your damage, right? It makes you a little tankier. You're going to get the enhanced ice armor, mana regeneration, and the reason why you want this is because this is your main damage dealer. This is the main thing that you're going to be taking out bosses and higher level mobs with. And then you're going to want damage against vulnerable enemies contributes 100% more to the ice armor's barrier. So the wording is kind of weird here. I hope I got it right, but I think 98% sure how this works is if an enemy is vulnerable, it won't deal damage to you. It'll only do damage to your barrier, and your barrier is super tanky. And so the last thing you're going to want to get is your ultimate. This isn't that big of a deal, but it does a lot of damage. It's really good. It freezes enemies. It helps with your effects, and then just get this to get a little more tanky. So yeah, that's a skill tree. Let's go over the gear. So not everything that I have on it directly helps out. Obviously, some of these, like skills, grant 25% damage reduction for 5 seconds. That helps out a little bit because you're going to be in a bunch of enemies with the Frost Nova, right? And then Ice Armor Unstoppable. The main 2 stats that you want to look out for are crowd control duration and crowd control damage to crowd control enemies. Now I have two sets of passives that really help out with that. The first one is this one. You have a 20% increased crowd control duration. The bottom part doesn't really matter, but that's really what we want. 20% increased crowd control duration. And then one down here on our weapon is whenever you are healthy, you gain 70% increased crowd control duration. That is huge. And you're going to be healthy a lot because you're going to have ice armor, you have the damage reduction from the helmet, you're going to have a lot of things to keep you healthy. And then the reason why you want this is because this thing, the Frost Nova, counts as a crowd controlled ability. So you're controlling the crowd by freezing them, obviously. So the reason why it's so good is you may say, oh, well, it still has a 10-second cooldown. Even if it's 6 seconds off, that's still 4 seconds, right? You still have 2 seconds. Well, that's the thing. With the crowd control duration, you can get that stuff. You can get them frozen up to 4 seconds, meaning that if you get 3 kills, you're gonna get it back immediately. So you can place it down, get 3 kills, bop, again. Get 3 kills, bop, again. Get 3 kills, bop, again. Just keep on freezing them, basically infinitely. And then it doesn't even matter if they aren't, if they don't die, if it's a bigger enemy, because they're going to take so much more damage while they're frozen and they're vulnerable. And so, if you're, depending on who you're fighting, you're going to have 2 options for follow-ups after this Frost Nova. You're going to have your Ice Shards, right? And you're going to have your basic attack. And you may think, well, what's the point of the basic attack? The basic attack can be better in some scenarios because of this explosion thing that we have here. So if there's a ton of smaller enemies around you, then you can use your basic cast and it'll blow them up. So let's say 1 or 2 basic attacks are gonna kill the enemy. You're gonna want to do this, if there's a lot of them, because it'll be much more efficient, because you're gonna be able to kill 5 people in 2 attacks instead of use all of your mana and kill those same people. Or, and the other option that you have is the Ice Shards. So this is a lot better for single target. Well, it's not exactly single because it's still ricocheted. So you're still going to get a lot of AoE attacks with this because it's going to ricochet off the big guy. So there could be 2 big guys and you can just use them and it'll kill a bunch of them, essentially. And so this is really good for the bigger people. And so now I've explained all that to you. I'm going to leave you some gameplay for a little bit so you can see how this build ends up working out. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed. Another thing to keep in mind is this is not as good as the build that I showed off in there. So I may have a little bit longer cooldown in my Frost Nova or something like that. It still shows the general way how you're supposed to play this build and how it works out though. So